It's fantastic to be here in Hobart for the State of the State, and it's great to have the Premier, Will Hodgman, here with us today. This year's State of the State, as Michael's indicated, comes hot on the heels of the release of our Connecting People with Progress report. And this is a really important piece of work for CEDA, aimed at recalibrating the goals around economic development. It highlights really where CEDA will be focusing our research in coming years. So today I want to briefly talk to you about why we undertook this work, what we found, and the policy stack, as we're calling it, that we believe is crucial for future economic development. So firstly, why have we done this work and why now? Australia's enjoyed 27 years of uninterrupted economic growth, clearly a world record, and we should be proud of that. Looking at the headline numbers, we've been incredibly successful, but there's a palpable disconnect between the dominant narrative around economic growth and the community's expectations. CEDA's Community Pulse 2018 research found that less than half of all people felt that they'd gained from this incredible period of economic growth. The disconnect is concerning, and it does matter. If people feel they haven't benefited from sustained growth, then they'll find little reason to support growth and economic development in the future. So we've got to find ways to rebuild community trust that growth and the supporting policies are in the people's best interest. The question, of course, is how to do so. In undertaking this research, we really wanted to look at three important areas: what our record run of economic growth has delivered, where we've fallen short, and where we think we need to refocus some of the policy priorities in a way that relates to the community. So let's start with the progress delivered. Australia's realised incredible economic gains through the expansion of the economy, trade, technology and investment. Let me quickly roll through some of the headlines here. The economy has tripled in per capita terms since 1960, and over the last 3 decades, average incomes have grown by almost 2% per annum for all income groups. This is much faster than other advanced economies. Life expectancy has increased by 10 years for women and 12 years for men since 1960. And today, 85% of secondary school students complete Year 12, compared to just 23% 50 years ago. A greater proportion of Australians are in jobs than previous decades, and those jobs are safer. And of course, Australia has demonstrated incredible resilience to economic shocks, whether it's the Asian financial crisis, the tech boom bust of the early 2000s, or the global financial crisis. Our flexible exchange rate, fiscal capacity, monetary policy capacity, proactive economic management, and a touch of luck have all played their part, no doubt. And Australia's achieved all of this with a unique brand of economic development. And by that, I mean strong multiculturalism through immigration, a social compact to share prosperity, and we're strongly positioned to benefit from globalisation in Asia. And despite this progress, and the fact that measured inequality at the aggregate level hasn't increased in the last decade, some Australians remain disconnected from opportunity and prosperity. Like the 700,000 Australians, including many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, who are in persistent disadvantage. Or the 585,000 odd young people who are not in school, fully engaged in study or employment. Disadvantage is also significantly concentrated in particular regions. And there are large gaps in educational outcomes based on socio-economic status. Much work also remains to be done in connecting more women to prosperity and opportunity. Women are underrepresented in senior roles, they are paid less on average, have less super on average, and according to the most recent HILDA survey, still do more of the housework. Environmental performance, it's an area that's been described as Australia's Achilles heel. Both major federal political parties went to the 2007 election with an emissions trading policy. Yet today we find ourselves without a credible, consistent and efficient approach to reducing emissions. On top of this, we've got some emerging limits to progress. Australia's productivity growth is not at the levels that we've become accustomed to in terms of underpinning that income growth that we've experienced in the past. And our strong headline labour market performance is masking rising long-term unemployment and stubborn underemployment. And that all-important resilience to economic shocks that I mentioned earlier, it's eroded a little bit in the last decade, and some government and household budgets look more vulnerable in the event of an external shock. So this takes me to CEDA's reform priorities for the future. What you might expect from me is a headline-grabbing list of must-do reforms, and no doubt there's some that I could advocate. But this is not just about addressing today's problems. It's also about preparing Australia to take advantage of opportunities for future progress. And that future progress has to be connected to the community. Therefore, we didn't think the answer lay in a reform to-do list. Instead, we identified policy areas fundamental to capturing emerging opportunities and retaining our social compact at the same time. We also need processes and capabilities to continually evolve policies in the public interest. To this end, we've identified a policy stack of 5 areas. The first, technology and data. The second, workplace, workforce and collaboration. The third, population. The fourth, critical services. And the fifth, institutions. In each of these areas, we've sought to highlight the policy intent that we will pursue through our research and advocacy over coming years. Now let me say a little on each of these areas. First up, institutions, and I think this is an obvious one. Trust in our institutions, be it government, business, other groups, has taken a hammering in recent years. We expect institutions to be accountable and have the community's best interest at heart. But what does that mean in practice? It means institutions, government, not-for-profits, business, education, working to understand community expectations. And it means institutions responding to those expectations, explaining their purpose and intent, being clear about outcomes they are striving for. And it means institutions being accountable, showing the community how they're performing against those expectations. So greater openness and transparency is critical. But there's more to it from CEDA's perspective. US tech entrepreneur Nick Hanauer says that prosperity should be defined as the accumulation of solutions to human problems. In the face of the complex and stubborn problems I've outlined earlier, we have to renew and refresh our institutions so that they can work well together to solve problems. This means increased transparency, sharing ideas, sharing and connecting data, and co-designing solutions to society's big challenges. Critical services such as aged care, healthcare and essential services are vital to people's everyday lives, and they make a substantial contribution to the economy in their own right. Our Community Pulse research confirmed, without a doubt, that health and essential services are by far the top issues of concern for people. But on key issues such as energy, we've failed to reach policy consensus, and in health, manage growing demand and system inefficiencies. In both cases, it's the community who will wear the cost, whether it is through more costly energy transition or longer waiting times or growing medical bills. The equation of rising costs, increasing expectations, ageing populations and constraints on the public purse is challenging. It will only be resolved through a sharp focus on outcomes and new models of service provision in many sectors. That in turn will require better access to and use of data, greater transparency and collaboration. It's in workplaces around Australia where we'll either succeed or fail in connecting people to progress and opportunities. The issues are always easy to list, but much harder to deliver on. So what are the big areas of challenge and focus that we'll be looking at? Well, firstly, there are too many people not getting the education that they need. The disadvantages are building, and we now have clearly identified groups who are consistently disconnected from educational opportunity based on their socio-economic status. There is room here for what the Productivity Commission calls handmade solutions, tailored to address the specific circumstances of target populations. Secondly, our education systems have to evolve to enable lifelong learning. And I know this is a catch-all, overused term, but let me be clear, a front-loaded, once-in-a-lifetime education to support a once-in-a-lifetime career is not the way of the future. This will require a major change of mindset. In our Community Pulse survey, access to new skills and training throughout one's working life was relatively unimportant to people. And finally, the vexed issue of workplace relations. For too long, we've failed to have a joined-up conversation on this topic. Too often, the debate is a polarising one. More regulation, less regulation, and nothing in between. The workplace relations legislative framework is no doubt an important part of the jigsaw, But let's not neglect the broader set of factors that contribute to collaboration and productivity in the workplace, including education, managerial skills and competence, organisational culture, structure and communication. The composition, growth and geographical distribution of our population is critical for economic development. However, serious political debate on population has been episodic, and we're in one of those episodes right now. There are genuine community concerns about how population growth is being managed, and that needs to be addressed. Population growth and migration has been incredibly important for Australia. The age and skills profile of our migrant population means that migration has played an important role in offsetting the ageing of our population and boosting the skills of our workforce. The concentration of population growth presents challenges for both cities and regions. Across Australian capital cities are growing at twice the rate of everywhere else. This means that we need to tackle thorny issues around the productivity of our cities and also stronger growth of our regions. A more strategic approach to immigration and therefore population growth is required. For existing residents and citizens and new migrants, the issues that impact quality life are the same. The ability to find a job, an affordable place to live, get to work, good schools, affordable healthcare, and living in a safe community. These issues and the ability to deliver against them should guide a strategic approach to immigration, population and settlement. Australia hasn't had a population strategy since World War II. There's a long list of elements that must be included in such strategies, and they must be coordinated across governments if they're to be effective. This will be an important test for one of Australia's really important institutions, our federated system of government. And finally, technology and data. Now, this is a big one. It underpins all the other areas and it's central to efforts to raise productivity. And economists like me still like to talk about productivity, even though I know that's not popular in all quarters. Compared to other countries, we were rapid adopters of information and communication technology in the 90s. We've slowed down a little and we need to pick up the momentum again. We also need to make sure that there's a diffusion of technologies across the whole economy, not just particular sectors. And while the future might be difficult to predict, we shouldn't simply passively accept or reject technological trends. Default yes or default no approaches to technology or ad hoc policy interventions are likely to undermine community trust in the genuine power of technology to improve people's lives. Government has an important stewardship role to play, and it must do that in a way that puts people at the centre of policy and technology. And if you want an example of this, look no further than the National Data Consumer Right. It's a transformational reform because it will enable consumers to guide the use of their data in a way that will promote competition and benefits to them. So to conclude, CEDA's expectations are that our research and advocacy on key issues within each of these topics will evolve as issues emerge. Our cross-sectoral membership, including business, government, academia, the not-for-profit sector, means we can bring broad insights to these areas. Policy and regulation are struggling to keep up with community expectations and technology. Policy frameworks must be nimble and responsive because that's what the future will require. There will no doubt be challenges in changing how we tackle policy and emerging opportunities, but we've clearly faced fundamental reform challenges in the past and we've overcome them, as we outline in detail in the report. The challenges this time are different, but fundamentally, they require the same kind of courage and creativity. I think our track record supports an optimistic take on our capacity to deliver another generation of progress and opportunity. Thanks for your attention.